Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So these games that I'll be presenting are part of a Simul I do on Friday nights 5 to 7. So of course this will be my series that I analyze this week's games against Sethey5. So let's get to it. So I'm white and Sethey is black. So C4, E5. This is what is called the English opening. Now, the English opening is something, where some people don't know how to play against it because it's so weird. You know, the only goal is really grab the center this way, get the bishop out, attack this square, but at the same time also prepare our forces for this square. So it's very interesting. C4, E5, knight C3, H6. And now H6 strikes me as very interesting, but I wouldn't say it's the best because, of course, I always like to say that it's best when you develop your pieces because, as I've said before, right, you want to develop, you want to control the center, you want to castle, and then you want to set up. So after knight f3, G5, a little bit, because I can take this, I could play h4, I can do whatever. So I decide, you know what, let's give a chance. d4, e takes, queen takes, threatens the rook, maybe threatens a check, maybe gets the knight there. Knight e7 gives me a chance to take the rook. I'm like, do I want to take it or not? I played knight e4 instead, looking for this silly checkmate. Our Simul member Sethey makes it happen. And knight f6. It's a very short game. So a few things I want to touch on this game. H6, yeah, I wouldn't exactly recommend it. Now, let me show you some lines from this opening that I would say are the standard. Some people usually play knight f6, g3, right? So I'm here attacking, but you play d5 first. After c takes, knight takes, bishop g2. Some people take, after b takes, it's really a control of the center, but there's knight b6, knight f3, knight c6, and then it's like castles, bishop e7, d3, castles, bishop e3. This is very standard. So the goal for white is to expand on this side and sort of like queen c2, a3, b4, knight e4, knight c5, right, to sort of make these knights look a bit clumsy. So that's the English opening setup. Some people, they play knight f3, knight c6, e3 with the idea of d4, but I would say bishop b4 is quite interesting here. Some people play knight d5, some people play bishop e2. It all depends, but in general, the English opening is pretty much harmless if black does the right things. So that's why I'd recommend against h6, but knight f3 I'd recommend against g5 because making a weakness this early, even though I get that you want to get your bishop out, but after h4, weakening your position a little bit. So after h4, bishop g7 perhaps. Well, after h takes, rook takes, bishop takes. Watch me come here. Queen c2, get my way in. After knight f6, preventing me from getting in. Well, easy pawn, right? So don't extend your king side too early. So sometimes that's a bad thing. And unfortunately, that led to disaster here. So let's get on with the next game, shall we? So against Sethey5, I played black this time. e4, e6, knight f3, knight f6. Now, of course, I am already out of book here. The correct move, I believe, is e5, and after knight d5, something like d4, c4, knight c3. Something like that for white is good. But the black strategy is to eventually trade off this pawn because it's very annoying. It doesn't allow the knight this square and sort of blocks this square as well. So interesting, but I think white has a slight edge here. This is usually in what is called the Alekhine defense, but I do play it in a later video, so stay tuned on that. So basically the idea here is that the knight runs to these squares, just like I described in the previous game, where black in the English defense also uses the knight on these two squares. Just flipped, right? The knight will be on this square, the knight will be on this square, d6 will happen, right? So it's a little bit different from the English, but also similar. So some things are repeated, some things are not. So after d4, that was the setup. So let's look at the game. After g3, these center pawns, just remember, are very fragile. So I always like to say, whenever your opponent makes a move, the first thing you should ask yourself is, why did they make the move? Right? So sometimes it takes time, right? You might never reason why your opponent is making the move, but at least you're making an effort to do it, right? If you don't see your opponent's intention, but you've already asked yourself the question, well then you've done enough, right? Sometimes you won't be able to see your opponent's threat because it's quite advanced. It's a few step process. You might not be able to see it. But here, my plan was very simple to take the pawn. So even the simple act of pushing the pawn, guarding it, getting the queen out, or pushing this pawn to protect it, all simple ways of protecting the pawn. But I am sometimes greedy. I thought this was a good pawn to grab, especially it's a center pawn, right? One of my main rules is controlling the center, and you don't want to lose it. So in this case, I've sort of already reigned supreme over this d5 square. Because now that this pawn is gone, my center's development is going to be much easier. So after d3, I go back, knight c3. Notice how my development here is just a little bit more straightforward. Now, I'm not sure about knight e2 because usually, as I said, you don't want to move a piece more than once at the start of the game for some reason. So I would say the just castle here should be fine. So after knight e2, castles, c5, notice how my setup is very comfortable, right? I'm going to play e5 maybe. I'm going to get my knight out, maybe get this pawn out, maybe get the bishop out. So all because of that one pawn here, it made my life a little bit easier. So after c4, very interesting because Sethey is following the principle of challenging the center again. And especially with this bishop knight thing overlooking the center, it's looking to be very interesting of a move. Now here I consider my options. Do I take the pawn? Do I let his pawn come up and let the queen open up? Or do I play d4 and make this pawn look bad, but let the bishop more open, right? I decided on neither. I said knight c6, and then we'll decide later. So after bishop g5, very good move, in fact, because in such positions, this bishop should be traded off because this knight does so much for the center. And by trading off the bishop for this knight, now white will have more pieces to look toward the center. So let's look in the game. Knight c6, bishop g5. It was a little bit of a mistake on my part. Notice it's my mistake and not Sethey's mistake. So I probably should have played h6 here, in fact. This is what is called prophylaxis, and sometimes you might think, why am I playing h6, right? But the simple act of preventing something like bishop g5 is important. I didn't do it, and that is something I can learn from as well. So, knight c6, forgot about bishop g5, and after h6, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, knight c3, threatening the center again. Now, I'm faced with a very hard decision. After d4, white plays knight e4, comes to take my bishop. It's not look great. It's not going to look great if I lose one of my bishops, right? Because after knight takes, queen takes, well, I loved my bishop here. Now it's gone. So I like my bishops. Not sure about you, but I would not play d4 because I like my bishop here. I like it. So I played queen d8. The reason being, I'll show you. After c takes d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5. Now you might think, this is free, right? But I play bishop takes g3 with the discovery, just trading a pawn for a pawn. So after knight f6 check, just inserting a check, queen takes, h takes g3. Now, here you're posed with two options. Do I take with this pawn or do I take with this pawn? And surprisingly enough, one capture is better than the other. And here's where I'll stop the video, but I'll promise there will be another part to this. Thank you.